Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Eric Blake. I am the founder of Blake Wealth Management, also the host of the Simply Retirement podcast, which hopefully many of you are familiar with at least. So glad you joined us tonight. In the work that I do, we spend a lot of time supporting women as they financially prepare for retirement. That might be Social Security, investments, taxes, Medicare, retirement income. And I believe all those things are important. And just if you're new to our community or you've never met me, yes, our practice does focus on supporting women. As I quite often say, I would not be the man I am today without the women in my life. I was raised by a single mother. My grandmother was widowed at 62. The man I call daddy was actually my grandfather. But these women, they've shaped the way I think about retirement planning. And of course, we do work with couples as well, but it is only with spouses that are both part of that conversation and both part of that planning. But there's another question that I think deserves just as much attention. And that is, what are you actually retiring to? Because even what I've watched in my own family is how quickly roles can change. You may go from working full time or to being retired. You might go from being a daughter to now being a caregiver. You might be planning for retirement with someone else, figuring out what that next stage will look like, and all of a sudden you're doing that on your own. And sometimes those changes happen when we plan for them, but sometimes they don't. So even if we have the financial plan, have we spent enough time thinking about the person and the life that goes along with that? And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And that's why I'm excited to have Joy Levin here with us to lead that conversation. Joy was a recent guest on our podcast, episode 79 of the Simply Retirement podcast, Creating Your Encore Chapter. She's also the founder of Gen X Exec Encore, has an MBA from Boston University's Questrom School of Business, and she is a certified professional retirement coach. Now, before I turn it over to Joy, I also want to invite you to join the Simply Retirement Community Facebook group. It's our private Facebook group. It's a place to ask questions about retirement, life, connect with others who may be facing some of the same decisions and challenges that you're facing, and also be among the first to know about these types of events. Always put those invites out first thing in that Facebook group as well. Again, we'd love to have you join us. That'll be one of the links that I'll share here in just a little bit. But tonight is also meant to be interactive. So again, please participate in the Q&A. Share your questions. When Joy finishes up her presentation, I'll come back and we'll open up things for the Q&A. So Joy, thank you again for joining me, and I'll turn it over to you.
So much. I'm going to share my screen. And if you can't see it or you can see it, just let us know in whatever way it makes sense. But so hello, and thank you so much for having me. So as Eric said, I'm Joy Levin. I'm the founder of Gen X Exec Encore, and I'm a certified professional retirement coach. And Eric, thank you so much for the introduction and for opening up your community today. So over the next 20 to 25 minutes, I want this to feel like a conversation and not a lecture. So I'll be asking you to drop comments a few times along the way. So keep that comment box open. And then Eric's going to take over for a live Q&A. So bring any and all questions and let's get into it. So before we get into today's topic, I want to name something, and that is that retirement does not arrive the same way for everybody. And so it's worth it to go through the two paths that I often see. But it's important to realize that both paths can often lead to the same place. It's just that how retirement happens can change what the path feels like. So for some of you, you get to choose the timing, right? So there's a date on the calendar, you plan for it, you're ready for it. And so it's something that you plan for, that you've chosen the timing for. So you had a lot of lead time to prepare. In many cases, there is a send-off, well wishes, and somebody telling you you've earned this. Often there's a bit of a honeymoon phase at the start. And for people in this situation, they often find that honeymoon phase at some point ends. And then they kind of feel lost or at sea. And that's because they are not prepared for some of the non-financial aspects of retirement, like how they are without their job title, What will their new social life look like? Because one thing that seems to happen when we get to about the retirement age is our entire social ecosystem changes. So, what will give them that feeling of purpose or feeling relevant? So, that's one path. So, for others, it's often not their choice. And what does that look like? Well, there's little or no lead time. There's no send off, no goodbye, no parties. And sometimes it came stacked on top of another loss, like a health change or a caregiving need, or something else that's already hard. And often there's no honeymoon phase. You go straight into it trying to figure it out. So here's what I want you to hold on to. Some of you choose the timing and some of you didn't. But either way, nobody hands you a plan for who you'd be next. So some of you already have a financial plan in place, and some of you are building one. Wherever you are on that front, there's a second plan that almost nobody builds, right? The financial plan has a lot of work and conversation around it for years, but there's this other part. And so the financial plan is the one that most retirement conversations focus on. And so for those of you listening, you may have that financial plan in place, and others may be working on it or thinking about starting it. But it involves things like income and savings and a withdrawal strategy, tax strategy. And sometimes it's built with an advisor like Eric. And it's the plan that's usually, like I said, the main focus of retirement conversations that you've been having with friends, adult children, other family members, and various professionals like a CPA or an estate attorney or a financial advisor, of course. So the personal plan, though, is very different. It's about who you're going to be once the role ends. And as opposed to the financial aspects of income and savings and withdrawal, it involves strategies around structure and identity and connections. And often it's built by you on your own. And it can take a long time to figure out what strategies are right for you because you don't have these different professionals surrounding you, guiding you through that. And often it's the plan that almost nobody builds. So here's what I want to say and leave you with. Whatever your financial plan looks like right now, if it's in place or in progress or not started, the person who goes with it will still need building. So I want to hear from you. So in the comments, drop in when you first picture retirement, what's the very first image that comes to mind? So overthink this or kind of analyze it. I'm going to give you just 20 seconds for the first image that comes to your mind when you think about retirement. So I'm going to wait for some comments to populate. And Eric, if you see those comments, I can't seem to see them, but what are some of the comments that are coming up?
So I would say, just as a reminder, just drop everybody into the Q&A. I don't think the chat is actually functional on this particular session, so you can feel free to drop those in the Q&A, and I'll take a look at them.
Yeah. So when I give this talk, I often see things like travel or golf or time with grandkids or rest. So are some of those things dropping in there, Eric?
We got the beach.
Beach, it's another one.
Time freedom. That's a good one.
Yeah, that is a good one. Yeah, all
Free
of a
time.
sudden, kind of your schedule is your own. You don't have to answer to anybody. So there is a lot about what you're going to do that often people talk about. But what I often notice is nobody seems to answer who you'll be. It's only what you'll do. And that's exactly the kind of gap that we're talking about today. So for a lot of us, timing isn't ours to choose, right? So here's some examples of that, right? There can be a layoff or a restructuring. There can be a health change. There could be caregiving for a spouse or a parent or a grandchild or adult children. A partner can retire first, and the whole household tends to shift around that move. And Eric, I know that this is close to home for you. Eric's own grandmother, as he said, was widowed at 62, and he's talked about watching her navigate a retirement that she never planned for. But the thing to remember is that's really not a rare story. It's in most stories. So I want to share two more stories, not identifying any one, just composites of people I've known. So a friend of mine, I'll call her Linda, spent 24 years at the same company, working her way up to a director level role. And then last year, in one afternoon, her division was restructured and her position was eliminated along with four others on her team. So at that time, she was 57, but there was no gold watch. There was no goodbye lunch. There was just a box, a laptop return date, and a severance package. And later she told me the hardest part wasn't the money for her. Her husband still worked and she'd land on her feet eventually. It was the quiet, right? She had spent decades being the person that people called first, asking for her advice, being consulted. But then all of a sudden, one Tuesday, right after she left, nobody's calling. So another story, another friend, I'll call her Renee, always planned to work until 67. And then her mother had a stroke. And Renee was the closest sibling geographically, so she became the default caregiver almost overnight, driving 45 minutes each way several times a week on top of a full-time job. So about a year and a half into that, she realized, you know what, something has to give, and it's not going to be my mother. So she left work 2 years earlier than she planned. Again, nobody threw her a party. She wasn't retiring, she told people. She said, I'm just taking a break to help out. But 3 years later, she still hadn't gone back. But so what do these two stories illustrate? It's that whether or not the retirement is planned, it can still hit hard when it happens in unexpected ways. Even for those people who plan it and it does happen on their schedule when they plan for it, it can still kind of hit hard, sometimes at first and sometimes months or sometimes years later in very unexpected ways. So, and I want to take a minute to talk about something specific to this room, since most of this room is women. Retirement, especially the non-financial aspects, often hit very differently for women than men. And there is research that bears this out, right? Retirement is more often involuntary for women because it's driven by caregiving or health or job loss. Women's careers are less likely to run in a very straight line because often they're reshaped by caregiving somewhere along the way. About 6 in 10 caregivers balancing kids and aging parents are women, and women report more emotional strain from it than men do. And the median age of widowhood for women is 59. Most men die married, but most women eventually don't. And I'm not sharing this to be negative or discouraging. I'm sharing it because if this feels harder for you, it is not in your head. There are real structural reasons why. And it's important to understand what those reasons are. And there are statistics about this great wealth transfer coming. And most of that wealth, because of all these dynamics and women outliving men and being widowed early, will transfer to women. And it can be very overwhelming when you're the only decision maker, or sometimes in some cases, when your partner has been making those decisions and having those conversations. And that's why I really admire what Eric does, because he really makes sure that women are always involved in the conversation. So here's what I would encourage you to do differently, and I would encourage you to start now. So the first thing is to build your own structure and community. So not just as a couple, the timeline and eventually the day-to-day may end up being yours alone to manage. So you want to make sure that, and this is true for men too, if they end up somehow alone by divorce or whatever, eventually they really need to have their own community, their own tribe, their own things to do. There's this expression I love, we married for better or for worse, not to have lunch together every single day. So it's really important to have your structure and your timeline that's yours alone to manage. The second thing is Get financially in the room now, even if somebody else is handling some of the details, because sudden transitions catch women very unprepared, or too often that seems to happen. Give caregiving its due. It is real work. And I think anybody who's done it can testify to that. And it deserves relief and boundaries, not just an assumption that it fills a structure gap. And since the career path here was rarely a straight line, I think it's important to be extra deliberate about naming what you'd say instead of a title. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So now I want to give you a fast way to check where you stand. And I've got 3 questions for you. No wrong answers here. It's just insights and information for you to have so that you can plan more effectively in what this will look like for you, all these non-financial aspects. So the first one is about structure. What does a typical day look like? How do you structure a week? The second one is identity and connection. So what are some of the new roles that you would like to take on? When people retire, like I said, their entire social ecosystem can change really dramatically. Their colleagues they used to spend time with are suddenly not there. A lot of times, friends have moved away, or you're moving away, or you used to be friends with your kids' friends' parents, and suddenly that changes too. So it's really important to plan for the identity and connection piece. And the third one is around purpose, because when the title is gone, what will you say when you're asked, what do you do? And sometimes people say, I'm retired. And some people enjoy saying that. For a lot of people, it ends up falling flat, right? It just kind of ends the conversation. Sometimes it doesn't. People will say, I'm retired too. But a lot of times, I think especially now as Gen X is moving into retirement and retiring in some cases later, a lot of your friends will still be working. And so when you say, I'm retired, they don't really know what to say. So what I'm going to do now is walk through each one of these areas by asking you a few questions. And I would love it if in the Q&A, you answer live in the comments, either yes or not yet. So if your calendar structure disappeared tomorrow, what would you know? What would you know what fills Tuesday at 10 a.m.? So you might say, yes, I definitely know a random Tuesday exactly what I would do if I wasn't working. Or you might say, not yet. I really haven't thought about that. So if the answer is not yet, here are a few small moves that you can do today, right? One is to pick a standing weekly commitment, a specific day, a time where somebody is expecting you. Because for a lot of people, there is nothing worse than feeling like, oh my God, it doesn't matter if I'm not there. Nobody's going to notice. The second thing is to block next week's calendar in advance, the way that you're doing now for meetings or the way you used to do. Or just try structuring one day this week before committing to more, right? A career gave you this structure for free. But once it's gone, it has to be built on purpose. So if your answer was not yet, the key ingredient here is external accountability. It's figuring out systems that you can put into your life that will keep you externally accountable. People will see you. They're expecting you. You have commitments that you want to fulfill. So the second one is identity and connection. So the question here is, do you have people in your life who know outside the role that you're leaving? So who know you outside the role you're leaving? So again, it could be yes. Yeah, I know a lot of people who know me outside that role that I'm not going to be doing. It could be, I really haven't thought about that yet. And it could be also kind of because they know me, but they're going to be moving, or I'm going to be moving, or something is going to change. But if the answer to that question is not yet, there are a couple things you can do. One is to reach out to one person this week who has nothing to do with your old job, right? And they will get to know you outside of that role. One is to name 3 people who know you outside your old role. And if that list is short, that's an insight for you. It's not a failure. It's just giving you information about what your life looks like today and what it can look like. Or join one recurring group or built around an interest, not around your resume. So work friendships happen by proximity, and working lives provide that proximity. But this chapter's friendships don't really often have that proximity, so it takes that deliberate effort. So the last one is purpose. If somebody asked, what do you have an answer that isn't your old job title? So again, could be yes, definitely, I know exactly what I would say, or it could be not yet, I haven't figured that out. So if the answer to this one is not yet, I want you to think about or write down one sentence. These days and use a verb instead of the title. And this is where we tend to find that it's the things that we did in that role when we were working. It's not the title. It's maybe you were mentoring others, or maybe you were managing a project. And so you were very into details. Or maybe it was that you were really responsible for finances, whatever it was. Realizing what these things were, these actual activities you did, helps you to see what the energy beneath the role was that was giving you energy. And it also shows you what was giving you some maybe frustration. So the next thing to do is say that sentence out loud once before somebody asks you and see how it feels to say that, whatever it is. It's kind of like trying something new on. Or jot down what you'd want to be known for in this stage. It doesn't need to be final. There's an exercise I do in my coaching where we talk a lot about this. What do you want to be known for? And we have a fun activity around it. But the important thing here also to know is it's not final, because we are going to change. Who you are at 57 or 63 is not going to be who you are at 69. So we are going to keep changing. Once you're retired, it's not like that's the end. You continue to grow and change. So none of this needs to be profound. It just needs to be ready. I want you to just be ready for this question so that you're comfortable answering it. So now let's suppose there are some of you who have said yes to all 3. So I have a quick word for you too. So structure needs revisiting every year or 2. Like I said, what holds at maybe 62 may not hold at 68. So you want to continuously assess, is this structure still working for me? There are a lot of reasons it can change. What's important is to think about it every couple of years and see, does this still feel right? Identity and connection take maintenance, not just presence. So it's really continuing to invest in relationships and your identity and not just coasting on what's been built before. And purpose can go stale, right? Come back to your sentence that you just jotted down as the stage continues to evolve, because you'll probably find that it changes. What gave you energy before may change a lot when you say you have grandchildren or when you're doing something different. But if all 3 look solid for you, I would suggest to look around, because that's often where something like mentoring or volunteering starts, or some people go and sit on boards, which can be extremely rewarding. So here's what I want you to leave with, right? A real plan is not having every answer. It's knowing which questions you haven't asked yet. So if this stirred something up, I'd love to hear about it. You can find me on LinkedIn. I read every comment. And if you want to start a quiet way to start mapping what's next for you, there's a free guide up on the screen. I have a QR code there. I call it Mapping Your Next Chapter, and it will come straight to your inbox. So there's no pressure for this. It's just an option. I always love giving out free resources about this stuff. You can tell, talk about it a lot. I'm very passionate about it. So I'm happy to have a conversation or give out these free resources. So now I've said, I promised 20, 25 minutes. I feel like we're right there. So I'm going to hand it back to Eric for question. One thing I'd love for you to sit with while he takes it from here, and that's to think about which of these 3 questions was it hardest for you to answer honestly. Because again, that is information for you. That's an insight that tells you here's the thing that maybe I should focus most strongly on in the next few months or weeks or whatever it is. Yes.
That was awesome. So I'm gonna try to, if I can. There we go. So I'm gonna go ahead and share our links, and then maybe a few people have to hop off early and not be able to hang around for the Q&A. So I'm gonna go ahead and share all the links I wanted to make sure everybody had access to. So you've got Joy's website. You can connect with her. The download is there as well. You can connect with her on the website. And I think a couple of things I wanted to share a couple of things just from the couple of different interactions you and I have had, some of the collaboration we've done. I think about my grandmother's story, and I think that's part of where my fascination with retirement planning came from. Is my grandparents actually retired in their late 40s. Very fortunate. So as being widowed at 62 could have been significantly different had they had the typical work till 62, 65. So they were fortunate enough to spend a decent amount of time, not as long as I would have loved or that she would have liked. But that's where that when I was growing up, we were at Lake Texoma fishing, and that's what my summers consisted of, was being with them during these what I didn't know what retirement was. But I knew I something sound pretty good here, that they're in their late 40s, early 50s, and they're just fishing every day. So they did something right. But then that also speaks to what you do as far as coaching people through transitions around saying, well, it was probably 12 years ish, something like that, 14 years that they did spend retired together. But then the next 29 years from my grandmother's age 62 to 91, it was a completely different life. And it's what did life look like for her, and you can kind of see how her life changed and things she did differently when my grandfather wasn't there. And I think that's just part of these life transitions that you just don't plan for. And you do the best you can. But I think having somebody like you coaching through how do I think about this differently? How do I get myself involved, especially in situations like that where, when you spent 40 plus years with somebody, you knew who you were spending your time with, and then all of a sudden that changes. Now your mindset needs to change as well, and it's not easy. And that's really where I think the work that you do becomes so valuable. And it's something also to me, I think it's so important because with what I do in doing financial planning, I think I'm really good at it. But part of the reason I'm so passionate about it is I feel like I want to take on the financial side of things onto my shoulders so that our clients can spend the time doing the things they enjoy doing, not worried about your finances. And that's where I think retirement income planning or retirement planning is so different than when you're in your 60s versus when you're in your 30s and 40s, because it's going to be hard to separate the financial from the work. Because again, you're working to earn money so that you can save and eventually be able to retire. But retirement to me is just it's a different thing, ideally at least, where I worked all these years, I've accumulated money, and I want to help you turn that into an income so that you're not worried about your financial situation. You're not going to work anymore. That's not your source of pay. Go out there and do the things you want to do. Spend time with family, travel, whatever it looks like for you. But that's not an easy transition either. Right. And again, that's where I think what you do is so valuable in helping people think about what's that next phase really going to look like.
It's true. And sometimes there are people who are perfectly happy with, having lunch and then playing pickleball and then going out for happy hour. And there are other people that try that and they end up failing at retirement because it just does not feel right. They feel very uncomfortable and they feel like, well, I'm not relevant and I don't have that purpose. And that's really what I work on with people, is trying to at least start with values, because a lot of times people are building their careers and they have to put aside some of their values just because that's the way it is. They're building a career. So it's important to figure those out. And then we build from there things like your purpose and who your social life is going to be and what that's going to look like. And so, yeah, and people have told me that they really find different things than they initially thought they would.
Well, so you just walked into the next question. So let me share this. So any thoughts or ideas on how to find purpose if you don't have a particular passion?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And it happens a lot. And there are a couple of different ways. I'm a big believer in micro experiments. So there are Like you'll think, you know what? I used to do XYZ, or I've always wondered about doing ABC. And so one of the first things I tell people to do is just try things. You will learn, I really like it or I don't like it, or it leads to things. There's another person I was talking to who in her career, she was working like a healthcare administrator, and it was a really intense job. And when she retired, she really had no idea. And she did remember that one time her company had sponsored one of those like service days, and she really enjoyed it. And it was like doing a community garden. So she went to volunteer at this community garden. And while she was there, she was talking to somebody, just a random person, about another situation they were having. Anyway, to make a long story short, it led to her being on the board of a nonprofit. Like that she realized, oh, this and somebody was there and talked to her. So these micro experiments, there are a lot of things can happen. One is they open doors for you, and another is they introduce you to people who give you new ideas. So, I mean, the social part of this also with purpose is so important because depression in retirement is a very real thing, and it is a bigger killer than alcohol. Depression, it's really bad. You really need to have a firm social community. And so trying out these different things is a way to gain that as well as purpose at the same time. But that's one of the things I work with people on is I do a lot of exercises with them to help them figure out, okay, you don't have a passion, and that's normal. A lot of people don't. And so we work on discovering ways that you can figure out what that might be and how you can fund that purpose.
Well, I think it's interesting that you talk about that because that's very much connected to a lot of times what I talk about, which is practicing retirement. Now,
Mhm.
actually, of course, a lot of times when I'm talking about it, it's practicing those last couple of years, living on what you think you can live on in retirement. If somebody says, "Well, we're living on $10,000 a month while we're working," I think we can do six. I think we live on 6,000. Like, are you sure? Let's practice that. Let's spend 18 to 24 months seeing if you can live on $6,000 a month. But I think it very much connects to what you're talking about as well as start practicing the things you think you want to do in retirement. If you think you're going to play pickleball in retirement, start taking a few pickleball lessons to see if you even like it. You might not, you might hate it. I mean, I kind of caught the bug there for a while, but everybody's different and the other thing, some reason you might have brought this up at one point, but and I'm not going to take credit for it because I heard this somewhere. But think about the things you enjoyed when you were a kid that you might have
Exactly.
gotten away from.
Right. Exactly. And it's easy to forget those, but when you look back to them, you can also realize why you enjoyed them. What was it about it? Was it the person you were doing it with? Was it a physical activity that you miss? What was it about that you enjoyed? And you can recreate that. And so, yeah, that is one of the techniques we use is thinking back to what you enjoyed as a kid. Exactly. Yeah.
So please feel free to drop in questions. Obviously, we've got the first one. So if you've got questions, if there's challenges, if you're getting close to retirement, and you're trying to think through how am I going to navigate this transition, please feel free to share questions. I will make sure that the Joy has the opportunity to answer those. If you've got retirement planning more on the financial side, I'd be happy to address some of those as well, or maybe Joy and I can address them together. But feel free to go ahead and drop some questions in the Q&A. Let's see, I was gonna refer back to well, I think one of the things, again, it's interesting that people get excited about that transition. We had a client that actually is a couple that she actually retired before he did. What's really cool is they both like golf and they like playing golf together. And when they came to me, he just got the typical story, just got laid off. Like, okay, can I retire or I know am I gonna have to go find something else? And actually went through them, did the analysis, went through all what their goals are, what their living expenses were. We put the plan together, and ultimately it turned out that yes, it looked like they could retire, they could move forward. And even as we were going through this, he had just gotten laid off, and he was already we had to schedule our times around his tea times, which is good. Again, not nothing wrong with that, but it's like let's make sure that you can't play golf every day, or maybe you can, but that's a pretty expensive hobby, right? So what else are you gonna do? What else is gonna be on the agenda? Whether it's staying reconnected with people that unfortunately there was multiple people that were affected by this layoff. So that might be a built-in network right there of people to stay in touch with. But just thinking through, what else am I gonna do? What am I gonna spend my time doing? Is golf gonna be a couple times a week? What am I gonna spend the rest of my time doing?
Exactly. Yeah. Because
And I
people
think yeah,
today, I'm sorry, Eric, I couldn't.
no, all good. Go ahead.
Yeah, people retiring today, they're looking at 30, 40 years, right?
Mhm.
Depending on how old they are and hopefully living that long. And that is a long time to spend on a golf course. So it
At
is
some point,
important
yeah,
to
at some point, it's not your body might not agree with you.
right. So it is important. And there was another story I had heard from another financial advisor where he said this was about why it's so important to plan for the non-financial aspects because they impact the finances. In this case, this guy had retired, and after a couple of years, he realized, I love the water. I want to be on the water. And so he wanted to buy a boat. Problem was, because he retired, he didn't have the income to show for credit. And so he could not buy the boat. And he was really disappointed. And the financial advisor was like, if we had planned this before, we could have structured things a little bit differently, right? And so that's another reason why it's so important to have this conversation before. And I always tell people, don't wait until you're retired and you have this hard landing. Start thinking about this stuff a couple of years before, then you can plan for it better.
Excellent. So let me take a glance at the Q&A. So no questions, no more questions at the moment. Is there anything so let's think about this. So when somebody says, I'm gonna travel or I'm gonna spend more time with family, finally gonna do all the things I haven't had time to do, is that enough of a plan, or are there things you'd encourage them to think about in addition to all the things that I think I'm gonna be able to do? What else
Yeah.
would you recommend?
Definitely. Like I said, I think it's really important to first think through your values, right? What is it that you admire in other people? What do you really respect? Because that can give you clues to what your values are. And then are you doing things that are consistent with those values? And that can then form the basis of the other pieces that I feel like are important aside from travel and hobbies is your purpose, right? Figuring out, I've always admired people that are XYZ. So, how can I incorporate that into my life? That can be a purpose. Another big one is legacy, right? And some people think, oh my God, legacy is huge. Like, I can't fund an endowed chair at a university. I'm not going to, whatever it is. Some people can. But for those who don't, legacy can be very small things. And it's just like the story you were telling about fishing with your grandparents. That is a legacy that they
Mhm.
left for you. And so it's very important for you to think what are the little things that you can do in a day that can create a legacy for yourself, for other people. So that's another thing we work on. And also the people that you want to be with. What are the gaps now in your life socially and how can you fill those? And then we talk about passion and place. Where do you want to live? Do you want to live in the same town, but in a smaller place? What does that look like? And what if you're going to move away? How can you rebuild your social ecosystem? And so what we do is when we take all of that together, we end up building what I call an encore identity. It's you're the same person really. It's just a different way of thinking about yourself for this next chapter that fits better. So
So I'd
those
like to
are the
get your
kinds of
thoughts.
things.
Yeah, so I'd like to
Yeah.
get your thoughts on something because this is something I've used in conversations quite a bit, and it's not again, that's not an original thought. I'm stealing this from somebody, I'm sure. But it's the idea that if you really want to know what's important or figure out what's important to you, you look at two different things. You look at your bank account and you look at your calendar. What are you spending your time on? What are you spending your money on?
Exactly. Yeah. And the calendar thing, like I was talking about in that presentation, what are you going to do when it's Wednesday at 3 and you're just kind of staring out the window, right? That's why it's so important to do all this planning. Yeah.
So, well, so I'll throw it out to you. Any questions you have for me? I know I think there's such a great connection between the life planning and the financial planning they need to go together.
Yeah.
And I
One
think that's
question that I find comes up is people are so used to living in this accumulation mindset. And then all of a sudden they retire and they freak out about spending the money they've accumulated. They are so afraid we have been drilled, especially our generation. We were the first ones not to have pensions. We were the first ones to have to self-fund retirement. And so we're so used to having it hammered in our heads to save and save. And then when the time comes to think of spending, it's like a whole mind shift. So I wondered if there are ways that you tell clients to think of that help them with that mind shift.
I think a lot of times I talk about what I would call your retirement paycheck. So it's kind of recreating the mindset of, hey, you're getting paid every twice a week or every twice a month, whatever, every other week, whatever it might be. So we use a concept we call a retirement paycheck, and it's something very similar to what a lot of people are used to, but it's figuring out we're identifying what your income sources are going to be. It's looking at, obviously, you're looking at your Social Security, you're looking at what your investment assets, how much income can I expect from my retirement assets. But I think it's identifying, we use something called what I would call our guardrails approach. And I think that's one of the things that scares people so much is is it feels like, well, and now I've got more time. I've got time. But the one thing that they can't get over is that hurdle of, well, what happens if the market crashes, or what happens if all the what ifs start creeping in because you don't feel like you have enough time. It's not like I can go back to work. Unfortunately, there's the whole thing about I can go back and be a greeter at Walmart, that example. But I think it's also identifying, okay, let's figure out what's a reasonable retirement paycheck based on what your resources are. And what I find is really helpful is identifying what we call our income guardrails. And it's very simply, what are the objective points where it would make sense for me to increase income to keep up with inflation, but also understanding at what point might it make sense for me to decrease my income. And it's usually a temporary thing, right? We it's always a when the market goes down, because it will. It just doesn't happen as much as most people think it does, because when you're watching it, when you get the 24/7 news telling you that the crash is going to happen tomorrow, or just wait, the next shoe is about to fall on the economy, or whatever it is. But thinking about objectively, at what point would we want to adjust our income? And again, understanding those guardrails when you're saying, okay, here's at the upper guardrail, that's when we can increase your income. Lower guardrail, that's when we decrease your income. You kind of think about it like, if I'm driving up the side of a mountain, well, I've got the mountain on one side, I've got a guardrails on the other side. As long as I don't hit either one, I'm going to be okay. Just stay in the middle, know where my adjustments are, make your adjustments as life happens, as the world changes, as the markets change, the economy, it's going to happen. But objectively knowing what my decisions are, instead of making them out of emotions, because any financial decision made out of emotions is almost always going to be the wrong one.
Yeah.
I think that's where if ideally we can pull the emotion out of the equation as best we can. You're never going to do that fully, but as much as we can pull the emotion out of the equation, the more confident you're going to be in your financial situation, which gives you the confidence to have more, to do the things you want to do, and not be as worried about what I can do. But that's definitely a real fear of people being afraid of spending money, right? Especially if they're really, really good savers. That whole mindset shift of, well, I've always focused on saving. Now I'm supposed to be spending this. It's not an easy transition.
It's not. And I see it a lot. And I think what you're talking about, the guardrails, also gives people a little more control over a situation where they feel are out of control. And so I'm sure that psychologically helps them as well.
Right. So it's what do I say? It's knowing what we're going to do in advance of the crisis, not waiting till we're in the middle of the crisis to
Right.
say, okay, what do I do? Should we do something? Right. And almost always the answer to should we do something is almost always no. But from time to time, periodically, it's, hey, we need to tap the brakes a little bit temporarily until things get a little bit more stable, and then we'll move forward from there. But it's, again, creating an environment of objectivity versus subjectivity of, again, we need to know what their plan is going to be in advance of the crisis, not when we find ourselves in the middle of one and now we're trying to figure out what to do. That's really where
Yeah.
the guardrails approach becomes so valuable.
Well, I can see how. Definitely. Yeah.
Let's see. So we had looks like a couple people had to hop off. So thank you for an excellent presentation. That's one of the comments. Let's see. Thanks for this. Lots of good info. especially normalizing how this phase may be particularly difficult for women and the fear of spending what we worked so hard to save, which speaks to exactly what we were talking about, that mindset shift.
Yeah, it's huge. And the other thing I want to recognize is that this is definitely this has big challenges for women. And I also think that men have their own challenges in dealing with this too, for a lot of different reasons. So I think it's important to try to be sensitive to that as well as being understanding of how it's harder for women sometimes.
Well, and I know you've talked about this in different circumstances where it's that the women and men have their own challenges, whether it's men finding community or losing their community that they
Yes.
had through work and having a more of a challenge in finding those a new community. Whereas, and there's other challenges that women face as well, but you brought it up in your presentation about the statistic I've used is 80% of men will die married, 80% of women will die single, right?
That.
So at
Yeah.
some point, you're going to find yourself, women are going to find themselves as the sole decision maker from a financial perspective. And so being prepared for that and knowing what your resources are becomes extremely important. And again, that's kind of where our role is and why I think our synergy between the work you do and the work we do is so valuable. But I think that's a big part of this. Everybody's got challenges. It's just trying to figure out where are the resources I can go to. You're not going to know the answers. You just got to know ask the right questions and know who to ask.
Exactly, right. And that was the thing I came up with at the end was it's not having every answer, it's just knowing which questions you haven't asked yet and where to get those answers.
Exactly. All right, got a couple more thank yous. Let's see. Thank you. This was thought provoking. And my comment is Eric's guardrail setup gives us lots of comfort as we try to get used to the spending versus saving phase. So thank you for that comment.
I love that idea. Yeah. It really makes it so much more manageable and not feel like, and what you said is true. It's temporary a lot of the time
Right.
because people think, oh my gosh, the market's going to drop. My entire thing is going to be gone. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And it's obviously more complicated than that. But the thing I always tell people, there's never been a permanent decline in the stock market. So let's see. Let me check the Q&A box one more time. So I'll close it out. But Joy, any other closing thoughts? Anything else you wanted to share?
I think we covered a lot. I covered a lot of ground here. Like I said, I think it's important to always ask the questions that you haven't asked yet because they're sitting there waiting for you to explore them. And there's so many opportunities for things to do in this next chapter. It's worth it to understand what's going to align with your values and give you that feeling of being relevant and productive.
Absolutely. Well, Joy, thank you so much for joining. This
Yeah.
was awesome. Thank you to everyone who joined us and participated in the conversation tonight. Again, I think one of the biggest takeaways from this discussion is that we can spend so many years preparing financially for retirement without spending nearly as much time thinking about what we actually want our life to look like when we get there. And as we talked about tonight, sometimes we get to choose what that transition looks like. Sometimes we don't. And I think that's really so valuable for what you've shared. And again, asking the right questions and knowing where those resources are. You're an amazing resource. So hopefully some people will reach out to you for additional guidance. Again, thank you for everyone for joining us. Again, if you haven't, I definitely would encourage you to join our Simply Retirement community, that private Facebook group that we shared earlier. Please reach out to Joy, connect with her through her website, through LinkedIn, any of the methods that she has already shared. This was awesome. Joy, thank you once again. Until next time, I'll share what I close every podcast episode with. Please remember, retirement is not the end of the road. It's the start of a new journey. Have a great evening, everyone.